They said he didn't belong in a courtroom unless he was in handcuffs. They said he was just another hoodie-wearing inner-city statistic waiting to happen. But the moment Malik Johnson stood up and whispered, "I'll represent myself, Your Honor," the courtroom cracked with laughter, not the joyful kind, but the dismissive, venom-laced kind that told you they had already made up their minds about who the 17-year-old boy was long before he opened his mouth. The judge leaned back with a smirk, lips curled just enough to reveal how amused he was by the audacity. A boy, barely out of high school, standing without a lawyer, accused of shoplifting a $600 watch from a downtown store, where he said he'd never even stepped foot. The prosecution shuffled its papers with smug certainty. The bailiff exchanged glances with the court reporter, and 3 rows back, an older man in a tailored suit shook his head and chuckled under his breath. The entire room, it seemed, had already found him guilty, not because of the evidence, but because of how he looked, because of his skin, his silence, his decision to defend himself. Malik stood there in an oversized dress shirt and borrowed tie, clutching a manila folder filled with handwritten notes. And for a moment, he didn't say a word. He just scanned the room slowly, reading every face, memorizing every twitch, every doubt, every smirk, every wrinkle of condescension. And then he breathed in, shallow at first, then deeper, until the courtroom quieted. Because when someone breathes like they're about to speak truth, even cynics hold their breath. The judge leaned forward, tapped his gavel lightly, and said, "Go ahead then, Mr. Johnson, impress us," dripping sarcasm like oil on water. And Malik didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't fold. He cleared his throat and began with a calm that no 17-year-old should have had. He opened with a question. Does the prosecution have a verified timestamp of the alleged incident? And you could feel the oxygen shift, because that wasn't the question of a scared teen. That was the opening shot of someone who came to fight fire with law. The prosecutor blinked, glanced at his assistant, and stammered, "The surveillance footage shows the defendant entering the store at 4:07 p.m., to which Malik replied, "Objection, Your Honor. The footage has not been entered into evidence nor authenticated by a technical specialist." The judge raised an eyebrow, tilted his head, and asked, "Where'd you learn that?" And Malik simply responded, "Harvard Law School, online program, Your Honor." The gallery rippled with whispers, a few chuckles. The judge scoffed, "Self-taught YouTube lawyer." And Malik said nothing, just nodded and waited. The judge waved dismissively and allowed the prosecution to continue. But from that moment, something shifted, not because they respected him yet, but because they felt something they hadn't expected. Uncertainty, the kind that unsettles. Arrogance. Malik continued by questioning the validity of the shopkeeper's statement, pointing out that the report was filed before security logs had been pulled, indicating either a premature accusation or, as he put it, a preconceived bias against someone who looked like me. The words didn't come out angry. They came out clean, factual, surgical. And with every minute, the snickering faded, the smirking slowed, because even if they didn't want to admit it, the boy was making sense. He wasn't ranting or fumbling or speaking in slang. He was speaking law, clean and sharp. He cited case law, State versus Murrow, 1998, highlighting how timestamp discrepancies had previously led to wrongful arrests, and then he turned to the judge and said, "Am I allowed to call a witness, Your Honor?" And the courtroom paused again, because this wasn't just a teenager defending himself. This was a teenager who had memorized trial protocol, who had planned every beat of his defense like a composer, builds a symphony. The judge looked around, confused now, not angry, just off balance, and asked, "Who do you want to call?" And Malik responded, "The manager of the jewelry store." And when the judge looked at prosecution, they stammered again, "He's not here. We didn't feel it was necessary." And Malik raised his eyebrows slightly, turned back to the judge, and said, "The only eyewitness not subpoenaed, Your Honor?" The silence that followed wasn't casual. It was cavernous. It was the kind of silence that makes reputations shift and reputations crack. And for a moment, the judge leaned back again, not with sarcasm this time, but with a twinge of discomfort, like someone realizing they were no longer in control of the room. Malik then presented an exhibit, his phone record, showing he was on a video call with a college admissions counselor during the exact time the alleged shoplifting occurred. He even played a clip from the recorded Zoom call, dated, timestamped, location, enabled, showing him in his bedroom over 4 miles away at the exact moment the theft took place. The prosecution objected, claiming it could have been fabricated. But Malik had already anticipated that. He'd brought in a tech affidavit from the video call platform confirming the IP and metadata. And that's when a man in the back row of the courtroom, a white man in his 60s with glasses, stood up quietly and said, "I can confirm that video call, Your Honor. I was on it." The judge squinted. "And who are you, sir?" And the man replied, "Dr. Whitman, director of Harvard's Junior Law Scholars Initiative." And suddenly every head turned like it was on a swivel, because now it wasn't just a precocious teen quoting legal jargon. It was a verified Harvard mentor vouching for him. The judge sat frozen for a second, then fumbled with his gavel, cleared his throat, and said, "I suppose we'll take a recess." But the damage was done. The mask had slipped. The smirks were gone. The narrative had collapsed, because in less than 20 minutes, Malik Johnson went from being presumed guilty to being impossible to ignore. He was a threat. He was a scholar. He wasn't a punk. He was a prodigy, and everyone in that courtroom, the judge, the jury, the prosecutor, the bailiff, now realized they weren't watching a criminal trial. They were watching a reckoning, and as Malik sat, back down quietly, organizing his notes, breathing evenly, the entire court buzzed not with mockery, but with awe, and yet something still felt unfinished, because Malik didn't smile. He didn't revel in shift. He just sat there, calm, distant, focused, as if he knew this wasn't over, as if he understood that exposing the truth in court didn't always set you free. It sometimes made you a target. And as the judge rose and exited the chambers, his face pale and disturbed, Malik leaned back in his seat, eyes locked on the prosecution table, because he wasn't done yet. He had one more witness to call, one more twist to reveal, and that twist would turn the courtroom upside down, because what he hadn't told him yet, what none of them knew, was that someone inside that courtroom had planted the evidence, and Malik already knew who it was. Malik Johnson stood again as the judge returned, chambers behind him still humming with whispers, the gallery leaning forward as though the very benches might collapse beneath the weight of what had just transpired. The judge's brow was furrowed, his robe brushing the polished floor, and he cleared his throat before saying, "Mr. Johnson, you've demonstrated a command of the law most of us never will. But the defense rests?" And Malik, calm but resolute, shook his head and replied, "Not yet, Your Honor," his voice steady, resonant, betraying none of the nerves that might have once shaken a boy his age. The courtroom inhaled. The prosecutor glanced at his notes as though they'd suddenly turned to riddles, and the judge allowed Malik to continue, warning him only not to waste court's time. But Malik wasn't wasting time. He was building a case brick by brick. He began by challenging the chain of custody on the security footage, not by general accusation, but with laser focus, quoting Rule 901 of the Evidence Code, explaining how even a single gap in handling could render the entire tape inadmissible, and when the prosecutor objected that the store had provided it directly to law enforcement, Malik produced a document stamped by the clerk of court showing the tape was delivered 24 hours after the arrest, well beyond the 48-hour window required for an independent forensic witness, and thus potentially tampered with. The gallery murmured. The judge's jaw tightened and Malik paused, as though savoring their astonishment, then leaned slightly forward and said, "Your Honor, I move to strike the surveillance footage from evidence on grounds of unverified chain of custody and unauthenticated metadata." The judge's gavel hovered, then dropped hard with a crack that echoed like thunder, and he ruled the footage inadmissible, citing Malik's motion as legally sufficient, turning heads in disbelief. But Malik simply nodded and moved on. He next called the store security manager, a young woman named Cassandra Lee, who fidgeted in the witness chair, her transcript revealing she'd signed the initial theft report before the store's overnight technical team even reviewed the video, and Malik questioned her on camera timing, asking her directly if she'd viewed the footage before making her statement, and she stammered and admitted she had not, that she relied on a hastily compiled internal memo, and the memo's timestamp was stamped at 3 p.m., 3 hours before the alleged shoplifting, suggesting the accusation was pre-written and unrelated to any observed crime. That revelation sent a ripple through the courtroom as journalists in the gallery hurried to type notes. Jurors exchanged shocked glances, and the judge mumbled, "This is unprecedented." Before reining his expression back to neutrality, Malik then called a detective who had taken him in. Detective Harrow, a stocky man who shifted uncomfortably under Malik's piercing gaze. and Malik asked him to confirm whether the detective had personally witnessed the theft or merely responded to a radio call, and Harrow admitted he arrived after the shop's silent alarm had been triggered, his backup arriving 20 minutes after first responders, which meant he had no direct observation of Malik inside the store. Malik pressed further, asking why fingerprints taken from the display case bore no smudges or blood or disarray but were pristine and fresh. Harrow said he didn't know, and Malik pointed out that a struggling suspect would necessarily leave partial prints, not flawless ones, and yet the prosecution wanted the jury to accept them as conclusive evidence. The air felt electric as the judge leaned forward. "Why do you presume the prints were flawed?" Malik explained that he had spent 15 hours watching the police evidence collection video, noting how the officer pressed paper onto the glass without lifting the check for distortion, a technique so clumsy it suggested deliberate showboating for cameras, not proper forensic procedure. And when Malik asked the prosecution to call the lab specialist who processed the prints, the prosecutor froze, glanced at the judge, and admitted the specialist was unavailable and the report summary was being used in lieu of direct testimony. Malik paused, letting the silence swell, then said, "Your Honor, that violates a defendant's right to confrontation under the Sixth Amendment," and the judge's face drained of color before he had to nod and rule the print evidence suppressed for lack of testimonial availability. The gallery erupted quietly, stunned whispers replacing the snickers of moments before, and the prosecutor slid back in his seat as though struck. Malik didn't smile, he merely adjusted his tie and said, "Thank you, Your Honor," and the judge pressed his lips together, tapping his gavel before clearing his throat. Malik then turned to the jury, making deliberate eye contact with each member, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've all been told a story, but facts are not opinions, and today's facts tell a very different tale, one where assumptions and shortcuts have obscured the truth. And now it's time to let reason speak louder than prejudice." His cadence was measured, every word chosen like cuts of steel, and he had them leaning in. He finished by requesting admission of his final exhibit, a sworn affidavit from a character witness, a Harvard admissions official, testifying that Malik's student schedule, extracurricular commitments, and mandatory weekly seminars made it physically impossible for him to have been at the store that day. As the process server carried the transcript to the judge's bench, the door to the courtroom burst open, and Malik's mother, Denise, appeared in the doorway, eyes blazing with tears and fury, and the bailiff hurried to escort her to the witness stand. But Denise, voice shaking, called out, "Your Honor, I demand to testify." And the judge, caught between procedure and her passion, allowed her a moment. She spoke of Malik's character, of his tireless hours studying case law, of the scholarship offered in her hand from Harvard, of his volunteer work tutoring younger students in constitutional rights. And, as she spoke, the gallery rose, moved by her testimony. The judge looked on from the bench, surprised by her credibility, and Malik watched his mother with unspoken gratitude. The prosecutor rose to object, claiming her testimony was prejudicial, but Denise turned and challenged him. "Prejudicial? Only if you believe the truth is a weapon," sending a hush across the courtroom. Malik stepped forward. "My mother's testimony is rooted in verifiable fact, Your Honor, and any attempt to suppress it is another slash at my right to a fair trial." And the judge, exasperated and outmaneuvered, had no choice but to let her speak. As Denise stepped down, tears glistening, the judge called for closing statements, and Malik approached the jury box one last time. His tone softened yet remained firm. "You've heard the accusations, the hastily obtained evidence, the suppressed testimony. Today, we've unveiled every shortcut, every bias, and every assumption. The question isn't whether Malik Johnson looks guilty. It's whether you believe in the rule of law or the rule of prejudice. I rest my case, confident that justice, not judgment, will prevail." And he returned to the defense table without a glance at the judge, his gaze fixed on the jurors, whose faces had transformed from skepticism to respect. The judge banged his gavel. Court is adjourned for jury deliberation, and Malik sat down, leaning back, breathing slow, heart pounding not with fear but with the thrill of challenge. As the jury filed out, the judge's clerk approached Malik's table and whispered something, making the judge glance back in surprise. Malik's eyes flicked to the clerk and then to the judge, and in that moment, everyone sensed the final confrontation was imminent. The next phase of this battle would determine not just a verdict, but the integrity of the system itself, and Malik, prepared to fight on, closed his folder, straightened his jacket, and waited, knowing that truth was on his side, and that no amount of doubt could obscure a well-constructed defense. The doors closed behind the jury, and the courtroom fell silent, bracing for the storm to come. The courtroom emptied, but Malik Johnson stayed seated, alone with his thoughts and the weight of everything that had just unfolded. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with anticipation, because this wasn't just a courtroom anymore. It was a battlefield where every look, every breath, every whisper was charged with meaning. He pulled from his pocket a small, worn photograph, a snapshot of a man in a dark suit, standing tall with a Harvard crest pinned to his lapel. Malik's father. Not a man you heard about on the news, not a man who boasted or bragged, but a man who had sacrificed everything so his son could have a chance. Malik's voice echoed softly in his mind, rehearsing lines he'd memorized since he was 10 years old. They think I'm just a kid from the wrong side of town. They think I don't belong. But I do. I belong wherever the truth is loud enough to be heard. The door creaked open, and in stepped a woman Malik barely recognized. Dr. Simone Carter, his Harvard law mentor and his father's closest friend. Her eyes met Malik's, steady and warm, carrying the weight of years of silent struggle. "It's time they knew the whole story," she said quietly, her voice a mix of pride and urgency. The courtroom buzzed once again as she took the stand, the media leaning in, hanging on every word. "Malik Johnson isn't just defending himself today," Dr. Carter began. "He's carrying the legacy of a man who fought systemic injustice from the inside. His father, James Johnson, was a renowned civil rights attorney, a man who challenged the very courts that now doubt his son." A hush fell. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, the pieces beginning to click together. Malik's father had been disbarred under suspicious circumstances years ago, his legal battles branded too controversial, his reputation smeared to silence his voice. But Malik had grown up listening to those stories, had inherited his father's passion and determination, and was now using every bit of that knowledge to rewrite his own narrative. "I accepted Malik into the Harvard Junior Scholars Program because I saw what he was capable of," Dr. Carter continued. "He's not just book smart, he's street smart. He understands that justice isn't just a concept, it's a fight." The courtroom watched, captivated. The prosecutor's confident smirk had vanished. Malik rose again, holding up a legal document, an official pardon for James Johnson, quietly granted a month ago after years of advocacy, evidence of the system's slow, grudging acknowledgement of its own mistakes. "My father fought so others wouldn't have to," Malik said, voice steady but fierce. "But fighting means nothing if the system is built to break us down before we can stand." Then Malik dropped the final bombshell. Evidence proving the security footage that originally condemned him had been tampered with. Metadata revealed altered timestamps, missing frames, suspicious digital signatures only someone inside the prosecution's office could have manipulated. The judge's gavel shook in his hand as he tried to maintain order, but the truth spilled out too fast and too loud. Malik's mother wept quietly in the back row, clutching her son's hand, proud but exhausted. The media cameras flashed like lightning, capturing a moment that would soon go viral. Malik stood tall, no longer just a defendant, but a symbol of resilience and intellect, a living rebuke to the prejudices baked into the justice system. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving Malik alone with the judge, who for the first time looked unsure and vulnerable. "You're no ordinary kid," the judge admitted, voice low. Malik nodded. "I'm more than you expected. Your honor. And so are countless others like me." Outside the courthouse, the city held its breath. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Malik, hashtag Harvard Scholar in Court, hashtag Truth Over Prejudice, sparking debates, rallies, and calls for reform. Malik's story wasn't just about a stolen watch anymore. It was about dismantling bias, exposing corruption, and rewriting the rules for a new generation. He was invited to speak at universities, legal conferences, and civil rights forums, transforming from accused to advocate, from outcast to icon. Yet Malik never forgot the lesson he learned that day in court, that the law isn't blind, but too often it sees what it wants to see. He carried with him his father's worn photograph, a reminder that legacy isn't about the past. It's about what you do today to shape the future. The moral was clear. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those deemed insignificant. Never dismiss the voice of the unheard, and never let prejudice write the verdict before the truth is told. Malik Johnson's battle was over, but the war for justice had only just begun. Malik's courtroom victory was far from just a legal win. It was a seismic shift that rattled foundations, cracked facades, and exposed uncomfortable truths no one wanted to confront. The judge, once amused and dismissive, now sat rigid, his earlier arrogance replaced by a guarded respect laced with regret. The prosecution scrambled to salvage what remained of their case, but Malik's evidence was unassailable. Security footage tampered, witness testimonies contradicted by timestamps, the very officers sworn to uphold justice implicated in a cover-up. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper battle raged. Because as Malik prepared to leave the courtroom, the real war was just beginning. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every misjudged kid, every silenced voice, every system that preferred shortcuts to truth. As Malik's mother hugged him outside the courthouse, her eyes glistening with pride and tears, a group of reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions flying, but Malik's voice remained calm, measured, carrying the weight of a message far bigger than the stolen watch. This is not about me. It's about reform, about dismantling bias and ensuring that no one else is judged before they speak, that the truth is not bent to fit a narrative. His words sparked fire across social media and news outlets, creating a ripple that spread from local communities to national conversations. Yet back inside the courthouse, a new threat emerged. A man in a dark suit approached the judge, his voice low. "This case is going to blow up, Judge. We need to contain the fallout." But the judge, weary and conflicted, replied, "Contain? Or cover up?" The man smiled thinly. Same difference. Malik, meanwhile, was approached by an unexpected ally, an older defense attorney named Rachel Monroe, known for taking on impossible cases. She laid a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You got something powerful here, kid, but power attracts enemies. They won't stop until they silence you," she warned. Malik nodded. "I'm ready." She handed him a phone loaded with contacts, journalists, legal experts, activists, his new arsenal in a war that went beyond the courtroom. That night, Malik and Rachel pored over documents and emails, uncovering a network of collusion that stretched beyond the city's police department, linking prosecutors, officers, and corporate interests that profited from mass incarceration and public fear. The deeper they dug, the darker it got. Bribery, falsified evidence, intimidation tactics, and even threats against witnesses. Malik's resolve hardened, but so did the dangers. A few days later, Malik received an anonymous message, a photo of his mother's house. The porch light shattered, a note pinned to the door. "Stop digging, or next time it's not just a note." Fear flickered briefly in Malik's chest, but he swallowed it, turned to Rachel. "They're scared," she said. "That means we're close." In court, the judge finally ruled to dismiss all charges against Malik with prejudice. The prosecutor slumped back, defeated but furious. Outside, Malik's supporters cheered, but he kept his eyes on the horizon, because justice isn't about winning one battle. It's about changing the war. The next morning, Malik stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard, speaking to a crowd of young scholars, activists, and future leaders. "We're told the system is broken," he said, "but it's not broken. It's working exactly as designed, to protect those in power and keep the rest of us in line. We need to redesign it, rebuild it, so it serves truth, fairness, and equality." His words ignited a fire in the room, but behind the applause was the undeniable truth. This fight would cost him and those he loved dearly. Just as Malik stepped off the stage, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You've rattled cages, kid. Time to see what happens when they strike back." Malik read the message, his breath steady but his mind racing. He glanced at the framed photo of his father on his desk, whispered, "I'm ready, Dad." And as the city below bustled unaware, Malik prepared for the storm to come, knowing the next move could change everything, or end everything. Because sometimes the hardest battle is not proving you're right, but surviving the cost of the truth. And Malik Johnson was about to find out exactly how much that cost would be. The tension that had built around Malik Johnson's fight for justice wasn't just the weight of one courtroom. It was the weight of generations, the burden of history twisting beneath his every step as the fallout from the case rippled out like a storm swallowing the city. Malik's name was everywhere now. Headlines praised his intellect, the courage to defend himself, and the unmasking of corruption. But the praise was a double-edged sword. because those who saw Malik as a symbol also saw him as a threat. The prosecutor's office launched a quiet internal investigation, but whispers of retaliation floated through the legal community. Anonymous calls to Malik's school warning of backlash, and at home, Malik's mother grew cautious. Her once weary eyes now sharp and watchful. Malik understood the cost, but he also knew something deeper was at stake. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about rewriting the narrative for every young person who walked into a courtroom and felt already condemned. Malik spent his days juggling college classes at Harvard, speaking engagements and legal mentorship, but his nights were a different battle. Spent writing, strategizing, and building a coalition of activists, lawyers, and journalists determined to dismantle the system that had tried to break him. Then came the day when Malik was invited to speak before a congressional committee reviewing criminal justice reform. The room was packed with politicians, lobbyists, and advocates, all waiting to hear from the teenager who turned the system on its head. Malik stepped up to the microphone, the weight of every misjudged youth on his shoulders, and said, "Justice is not a privilege. It is a right. But too often, it is reserved for those who fit a mold, speak a certain language, or have the right connections. I stand here not just for myself, but for every kid who was silenced, who was seen as guilty before proven innocent." His words struck chords, ignited debates, and inspired new bills aimed at transparency, accountability, and reform. But change, Malik knew, wouldn't come overnight. The same judge who once laughed at him faced his own reckoning. Internal reviews revealed systemic bias and misconduct, leading to his removal from the bench, and a renewed call for judicial accountability across the state. Meanwhile, Malik's Harvard scholarship grew into a platform. He launched a nonprofit dedicated to mentoring at risk youth, providing legal resources and advocating for systemic change. His message was clear. Education is power, but justice is essential, and they cannot exist without each other. The media followed his journey, but Malik remained grounded. "I'm just a kid who refused to be quiet," he often said. "The truth doesn't need to be loud to be heard. It needs to be unwavering." Years later, Malik stood at Harvard's commencement stage, diploma in hand. Looking out at a sea of hopeful faces, he spoke not as a victim, but as a victor of a battle bigger than himself. "We are the architects of the future," he declared, "and it is our responsibility to build a system that recognizes the worth of every human being, regardless of where they come from or the color of their skin." And as the crowd erupted, Malik's eyes found his mother's in the front row. Her proud smile a testament to the journey they'd endured. The lesson in Malik's story was one of resilience and revolution. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those dismissed by society. Never allow prejudice to dictate destiny. And never stop fighting for a justice system that serves truth over bias. Malik Johnson's journey from a mock teenager to a Harvard scholar and advocate became a beacon, reminding us all that justice delayed is justice denied. But justice pursued with courage can change the world, because in the end, the scales don't just balance. They transform when we demand they do, and Malik's fight was proof that even the smallest voice, when armed with truth and unwavering resolve, can shake the highest halls of power. If Malik's story moved you, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next powerful story about fighting bias and standing up for justice. Remember, the truth is stronger than prejudice, and every voice matters. Stay with us for more stories that inspire, educate, and spark change. Thanks for watching.